Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. So, even in its final month, 2022 is continuing to be a strange year of upheaval for DC and Warner Bros. At large. Though unlike the very definitive cancellation of Batgirl and some other projects earlier this year, the latest news here seems to leave us with a lot more questions than answers. As most of you probably already know, Guardians of the Galaxy and Slither director James Gunn was hired to fill the role of being DC's Kevin Feige alongside producer Peter Safran. An article in The Hollywood Reporter outlined some of their possible plans, with Gunn himself weighing in on the piece later. In this video, I want to unpack some of what was in that article, as well as touch on Gunn's response, and hopefully try to glean a little bit of what DC will look like going forward. Oh, and before I really get into it, I did want to throw out a spoiler warning for Black Adam.
To stop the evil Doomsday, you need a hero who's more than a man. Superman. He's been called the greatest, the strongest, the first among heroes. Superman.
So, alright, in James Gunn's long Twitter thread reply to this piece, he said, "As for the story yesterday in The Hollywood Reporter, some of it is true, some of it is half true, some of it is not true, and some of it we haven't decided yet whether it's true or not. I think it's only fair to take Gunn at his word here and assume that none of this is set in stone. But I think it's worth going through this stuff, even knowing not all of it will probably end up being true." Let's start with maybe the biggest bombshell here, the claim that Wonder Woman 3, or at least Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman 3, is not happening. A day after the Hollywood Reporter piece came out, The Wrap dropped an article claiming that Jenkins herself had walked away from the project after her treatment for the film was rejected by the studio. It claims that she was invited to try to come up with a new treatment, but she decided to move on to other projects instead. If that's true and she doesn't return, well, I can't say I'd be completely surprised. Of course, it should be acknowledged that the first Wonder Woman was both a critical and commercial success for DC, which bought her a lot more creative control on Wonder Woman 84. I hate to say it, but that might just be the single worst superhero movie of the past 5 years. Okay, Morbius is probably worse, but WW84 was definitely more disappointing, since Morbius didn't exactly arrive in theaters with a lot of anticipation. Putting the Wonder Woman sequel straight to streaming, while movies like Dune and Top Gun Maverick held out for a real theatrical release, didn't do the movie any favors. But I think there's no getting around the fact that this movie would have been poorly received in any context it was released in. So it doesn't surprise me that the studio feels ready to move on from Jenkins, even if she did deliver them a huge hit with that first film. Still, I don't think Wonder Woman as a film franchise is going anywhere. I'd also be pretty surprised if they recast Gal Gadot. But I guess that brings us to the next big thing I should talk about, the possibility of recasting the entire Justice League. Obviously, Henry Cavill returned as Superman in Black Adam, but now it's looking like there's a solid chance that'll be it. The article seems to point to almost all those Snyder-era actors moving on, except for Jason Momoa, who would switch characters from Aquaman to the space bounty hunter Lobo. And this is the part of the article I have the hardest time buying. Do I think Gunn and company are looking to basically start the cinematic DC universe over? Definitely. But I'd also be a little surprised if they decided to recast everyone. Now, it's totally possible that they will, and I'll be completely wrong about this, but in Gunn's response, he said that he was excited for, quote, the opportunity to build upon what has worked in DC so far, and to help rectify what has not. To me, that just doesn't read like they want to recast everyone. Again, I could be wrong, but Aquaman was one of DC's biggest hits, grossing far more than Gunn's own The Suicide Squad. So I'm having a hard time picturing them abandoning it completely and having Momoa just switch to Lobo. I guess we'll see how Aquaman The Lost Kingdom goes, but if that's a hit, it'd be pretty bold to completely scrap the series and go with Lobo instead. I can see why they might try though, like Momoa does feel like a perfect fit for Lobo, and it's a character with a lot more edge than Aquaman. Still, I just really can't picture it happening unless Aquaman 2 completely tanks. And as for Henry Cavill's Superman, I'm gonna be honest, at this point I'd be disappointed if he didn't get to don the cape again. I know CEO David Zaslav has pointed to Superman specifically as like the prime example of a brand that they haven't used well, so it really seems like getting a Superman project off the ground soon would be a big priority. And sure, they could recast, plenty of actors can and have played the Man of Steel, but I feel like there's still a lot of goodwill towards Cavill, even from those who maybe aren't a huge fan of those movies. Maybe I'm just being sentimental here, but I do think that Cavill deserves another shot, even if the movie does end up having a radically different tone than Man of Steel. Based on Gunn's statements, it really does seem like DC is aiming for a completely cohesive universe, even across TV and video games. And I'm sure there's a lot of DC fans out there that think that's exactly what they need. I'm really not so sure. And I gotta say, while I understand where they're coming from, I'm just not sold on it being the best move at this point. When you look at a lot of DC's biggest recent success stories, like The Batman, they're movies that have benefited from not being weighed down by the baggage of a shared universe. And at the same time, we've seen the MCU struggling with its Phase 4 as the connected TV shows added hours and hours of new continuity. I think Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness especially struggled with this, as it had to follow up WandaVision while being completely different in style and tone, creating a ton of exposition to catch up those who haven't seen the show, while not being terribly satisfying to the big fans of the show either. In a shared universe, recasting becomes far more difficult, and eventually you face a lot of the same problems with convoluted continuities that have made Marvel and DC comics often feel impenetrable to newcomers. I'm not saying it's doomed to failure, but I'm saying why chase that model when you've already tried it once, and a wildly successful movie like Joker is about as far from that as you can get. Now, to be fair here, I'm sure what Gunn has in mind is going to be pretty different from the MCU. He's a guy who has worked inside that system and probably has plenty of thoughts on what works about it and what he could do differently. And though I feel like I do run a little more hot and cold on his work than many on this corner of YouTube, I am pretty fascinated to see what he comes up with. But then The Wrap had an article that I'm really hoping doesn't turn out to be true, and that's that the planned Batman Beyond movie, which would have co-starred Michael Keaton, has been canned. I know for some people the Superman or Wonder Woman news will hit much harder, but this was probably the one that got me the most. I was really looking forward to this project, and honestly, I think Keaton, being the age he's at and turning out great performance after great performance in the past decade, it just seemed like a slam dunk. I also think it would have made a ton of money, but I mean, what do I know?
Oh, Joker's got Batman. What is that? It's the all-new EXP Batmobile.
Then there's the Black Adam of it all. While Dwayne Johnson's social media is very invested in letting the world know that the movie did turn a profit, I think it's safe to say that the film wasn't the mega hit that Warner Brothers had been hoping for. That puts the studio in a really awkward spot, because for some reason a lot of the hype from Johnson around this movie wasn't about the film itself, but rather a sequel that doesn't exist yet where he faces off with Superman. With that post-credits scene really only adding to the feeling that this movie exists to facilitate the other one, which puts them in a pretty embarrassing position if they just decide to drop it all. Not that DC is exactly a stranger to post-credits scenes that go absolutely nowhere. I don't know, it's a really weird situation. Overall, I don't envy DC here. When you look at their slate of upcoming releases, from Aquaman 2 to Shazam 2 to the seemingly cursed Flash movie, you really get the sense of a studio that's attempting to make a sharp turn in a giant slow cruise ship. Some of the choices they make here will definitely make people mad. As Gunn said in his tweet thread, there's no way to make every single person happy. But I think a few years from now, it'll be really fascinating to look back and see just how this experiment paid off. DC is extremely chaotic right now, but it's always good to remember their peaks too, which is why I love the Batman the Animated Series working titles video that Just Right created, which breaks down exactly what makes that opening and theme song so iconic. You can watch it right now on Nebula. I post all my videos ad-free on Nebula, along with some exclusives too. And I'm far from alone, with great content creators you may know like Nando V Movies, H Bomber Guy, Windover Productions, and so many more. Nebula is great for both viewers and creators, as it takes away the constraints of YouTube's algorithm. Plus it comes bundled with another great service, CuriosityStream. This is a documentary streaming service that has you covered on just about everything, with their docs on nature, science, tech, and way more. We're talking thousands of documentaries here. And right now is the best time to hop on. We have a holiday deal for the bundle right now that's 42% off, meaning you can get both services for $11.59. That's not for a month, that's for an entire year. So sign up to CuriosityStream using my link, and you'll receive an email welcoming you to the Streamy award-winning Nebula as well. Just go to curiositystream.com/Captain Midnight. That's curiositystream.com/Captain Midnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.